Hello and thanks for watching the 103 GBF YouTube channel. I'm the Sandman with the latest episode of the coolest guy I know, and who doesn't know this guy, Wayne Hart from Eyewitness News.
Great to see you, Sandman. Great to be here.
Great to have you on this low-tech adventure. This is probably not what you're used to.
Not really at all, but I'm flattered because I've looked at a lot of your episodes, and you interview a lot of musicians. And if there was anything I ever wanted to be besides on TV, was a musician in a band, on stage, a rock star, if you will.
Is that true?
Oh yeah, I love music, but I just never took up an instrument when I was young, so I just kind of sit back and watch now. But boy, I'd love to do that.
Absolutely.
And I think I've been listening to you ever since I've been here. I've been here, what, 21 years, and you've been in the market, I think, a little longer than that?
35 to
35, yeah, a lot longer than that. So yeah, I've been listening to you on GBF since I first got here.
I know a couple times when we did live broadcasts with the weather radios, we talked a little bit. I know one of the bands you like is AC/DC, for instance.
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, I'm a kid from the 70s.
Yeah.
So the first group that I was really interested in, and not a group, it was Elton John.
Oh, yeah.
From the early 70s.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, the first concert I ever went to was his Goodbye Yellow Brick Road tour at the Spectrum in Philly. And I know a lot of the young people don't know much more about Elton John than what they see in the past few years, but I tell you, his catalog from the 70s is great. You got to dig it up, because you're not going to hear a lot of that on the air anymore.
Yeah.
But my brother was older than me, so I got a chance to listen to his records, and of course we're talking record players back then, when he was out with his buddies. So I started to listen to Black Sabbath, Grand Funk Railroad, James Gang, but more importantly Led Zeppelin.
Oh, yeah.
And I started to spin his Led Zeppelin disc, and in high school Led Zeppelin was my band.
Yeah.
Back in the late 70s. I actually had tickets for the final, well, it turned out to be the final tour that never happened, the In Through the Outdoor tour before Bonham died. So I never actually got to see him, but that's kind of what I grew up on in the 70s. And I had buddies in high school who got me into Yes, and Genesis, so I kind of like a little progressive rock.
Sure.
So, and then of course the Stones and the Who and all that kind of fill on in. So kind of a classic progressive rock kind of guy from the 70s.
Well, you really like all the stuff that everything is born out of.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, especially Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, just about everything today that's hard rock or metal is derivative of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So. But I have to tell you also, my mom was into country music, and that's all she listened to. So when I wasn't spinning the records on my record player, I got to hear Conway Twitty, Merle Haggard, Porter Wagner, Johnny Cash. So I still have a place for that in my heart, that classic country sound too.
Oh yeah. Well, me, you know, I'm not a big country fan, but I do like the classic country, like you do too. That's the stuff. That's the roots of everything, definitely. Yeah. Let me ask you a few questions about your job. First of all, for the uneducated like me, is there a difference between a weatherman and a meteorologist?
Yeah, I mean, technically a meteorologist has a Bachelor's of Science degree in the science of meteorology. It's a 4-year degree like any other science. It's not a special weather school that you go to. I went to Cornell, Ron went to Western, Stacy went to Purdue. And now they have schools that are a little more tailored to TV weather, Mississippi State, for example. So now you can actually, with a 2-year program, get enough of the coursework under your belt to use the title of meteorologist. And that's more and more common these days. In the old days, most of the people on air didn't have that degree. It was more about personality. Yeah. But now, with so much weather going on, you really have to know what you're talking about. Plus, we forecast. I mean, we don't rip and read the forecast. When I say it's going to be partly cloudy tomorrow with scattered storms or 3 inches of snow or whatever, that's my forecast.
Right. Yeah. And that's based on the data that you are trained to analyze.
Right. The data is out there for everybody to look at.
Yeah.
So we all look at the same data more or less, and then we make really an educated guess is what it is, because it's not an exact science. And we're not just forecasting for Evansville, we're forecasting for 21 counties.
Right.
So I have to keep in mind what may happen up in Vincennes, down in Madisonville, Fairfield, and Tell City, which could be in some cases a lot different than Evansville, especially in the wintertime when you're talking about snow.
Why is Florida always on the map? It's on every weather map I see. It's like that kind of the outer edge of the fringe of our weather.
Yeah, Florida is up there in the northwestern corner of our viewing area. Technically, it's in the Terre Haute market, but we have viewers up there.
Sure.
So generally, if stuff hits Florida, it's probably going to hit somewhere in our northern counties at some point. So it just kind of gives us a heads up to what's coming our way.
Did you ever work before it was a green screen, when it was actually like a Marshiyaki with a big marker weather map?
Never used those maps. I mean, even in college when I was doing this, we didn't have the graphics, but what we did, we took the paper maps and we used magic marker to draw in the fronts, and then we put a camera in to shoot that map, but we still used the green screen to put that behind me.
Yeah.
So it looked awful, but it was still a green screen technology. That really came about, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, as I was just starting to get into the business. So, yeah, the days of Marcia drawing backwards on the map, that's a real talent that I never had a chance to develop.
In the 90s, early 90s, I got to do celebrity weather. It was DJ Week on a station that does not carry local news anymore here in town.
Right.
And I just assumed there was a weather map behind me. I walked out and there was nothing there, and I was looking at every place, you know, for the prompters and stuff like that. It's probably a little tough to get used to that.
Yeah, it is. It is. The first time you do it, or actually the first, several weeks and months that you're learning the green screen, it takes a while to get your perspective and your position. But when I'm looking at the camera, I see myself, and I look to the side. I'm not looking at the wall. I'm looking at a TV there and a TV there, so I can kind of see where I am in space to know that I'm pointing at the right spot. And that also means I'm not reading a script either. In news and to a lesser degree sports, they kind of type out ahead of time what they want to say.
Yeah.
And then they kind of read it, and they can craft their sentences just the way they want them to come out. But in weather, we're kind of ad-libbing. We're talking about the weather maps, and sometimes something comes out of my mouth that I don't want it to come out because it was a thought here for 1 second, it's out the next, and it's live TV, so I can't stop and do it over.
How chaotic does it get when there's severe weather? I've seen like 2 or 3 of you in the weather center at one time. Is it like controlled chaos? Is everybody just jazzed and juiced up?
Well, I think that's the biggest misconception, is that we love severe weather.
Well, I didn't mean that by any chance.
Well, we get accused of that. It's like we can't wait for the next big storm, and a lot of meteorologists are like that. I don't think a lot of them are on TV, but they love what Mother Nature can do. But in the television end of it, it is stressful because it's not so much tracking the storm. The stressful part of it is interrupting the program, because you're going to upset a lot of viewers. But on those big events, we have the full team in there, but everybody has their own role. And I guess controlled chaos is a good way to look at it, because we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. So I almost liken it to a video game, where you're sitting there looking at the computer screen, and you've got these bombs, if you will, coming at you. You don't know where they're going to come from, but here comes one, you talk about that, and here comes another one, you talk about that. And you're never quite sure how it's going to play out, but it's just like a running commentary of what's happening and then what you think it's going to do over the next 15 minutes or so that you can warn people.
It is so accurate these days that you guys can kind of narrow it down to really streets and neighborhoods and things like that.
Computer technology, that all came about in the late 90s. Prior to that, the radar we showed was usually a big brown map with a couple of state lines on it and a dot for Evansville. That's the way it was when I started. But once computer technology increased, the speed of the processors, they could create these street-level maps. And originally we had to build every street-level view, but now, of course, for the past 15 years, we can just zoom it into wherever we want to go and really pinpoint where a storm is. So the computer technology has helped us out immensely, not only in terms of tracking storms, but also forecasting the weather. The faster the computers, the more data you can put into it, and the faster you get something out of it. So computers made a huge difference in what we do.
I want to ask you a couple things that people may not know about you from prior discussions you and I have had. You worked at CNN on weekends. You would go down and fill in.
Yeah, I first started in Buffalo out of college and went to Louisville. And then when I transitioned over to Evansville, I was up for a job at CNN, and I didn't get it. I was the number 2 pick, so I came to Evansville. But they used me as a freelancer back in the early 90s. So I got to do a weekend shift, I think about 3 times. And every weekend I was there, there was something big going on. It was a tropical storm one weekend, a tornado outbreak the other, and then a big Thanksgiving Day winter storm. So that was exciting back in the early days of CNN to do that. But they flew me into Atlanta, put me up in the hotel there at the Omni, did my 2 days, and flew back to Evansville on a Sunday night or Monday. So that was kind of exciting,
Is it more intimidating to know that you've got almost a global audience rather than, I mean, weather's weather, but you think of the scope of CNN, I mean, that's got to be pretty ominous.
Yeah, it is, but, once you get over those initial jitters. It's just you, just like you've always done, in a studio with a camera and a couple of people around. So you kind of try to block that out of your mind and just do your thing. And sometimes we block it out too much because you don't realize here, even in the tri-state, you got thousands of people watching you. But if you come in and watch me, it's just me in a room with a few people.
Yeah.
And you sometimes just kind of go through the motions because you're doing so many shows that you have to remember there's people at home watching you, and in some cases hanging on every word you say and picking you apart. And so you got to be on your game at all times. So I'm much more nervous in front of a crowd of people where you can see their eyes and see their reaction as opposed to being in front of a camera.
Yeah. One more question before we go.
Sure.
I know that from my inside sources, I've heard you're quite a basketball player.
Well,
you enjoy playing basketball?
I enjoy playing some basketball. I would say golf, though, is more my sport. But really, when it comes to what I can play well, volleyball and hockey. I love ice hockey.
Really?
Yeah, but I grew up playing street hockey. So I never, again, learned as a kid, same way I didn't learn as a musician when I was young. I didn't learn how to play an instrument, didn't learn how to skate, but I know the game very well. So I can still play ice hockey, but I have to think too much about the skating part of it. And now being in TV, ice hockey, probably not a good idea because you never know when you're going to get a stick up into the face or something like that. But yeah, I love hockey, volleyball. Wish I could play basketball a little better.
Yeah.
Football, too. I love football. Especially fantasy. We just had our draft, so love all the sports pretty much. So yeah.
And that kind of actually leads into the question: what do you enjoy doing when you have spare time?
Well, unfortunately, the weather never takes a holiday. It doesn't respect the calendar, so I don't have a lot of free time, especially with 2 stations now. But in what free time I have, I enjoy golf. That kind of, I say it de-stresses me, but sometimes I wonder why am I paying all this money to stress out over not hitting the shot correctly.
Right.
But if everything goes well, it's relaxing. So I like golf. And then, other than family time, my kids are now in high school, so I only have them around for a couple more years. So I spend time with them. I love historic preservation, and that's what I love about Evansville. The old part of the city, preserving what we have for future generations. So those are the kind of things I spend my extra time with.
Does TV really add 20 pounds? Because you look pretty thin. You look pretty thin to me.
It does, and that's why you kind of have to watch your weight, because it's the green screen that really does it.
Oh, really?
Because when you're in front of that green screen, the effect electronically, it kind of puts a little bit of a halo around the edges. So instead of this big, you're kind of that big. And so it does put a little weight on you. So you have to kind of watch the waistline there, especially as you get older, as we know. And with you can kind of roll in and do your thing in a t-shirt. Gosh, I wish I could work in a t-shirt some days. And that's why I have a tie on today. I'm about to go into work.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I was a disc jockey back in college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's one of the first things I did as a broadcaster. So yeah, I love to be in front of the mic, but not worry about what I look like. But then again, what you say is so much more important because that's all you got. When TV, I have a little more to fall back on. I can show a neat, fancy graphic.
Yeah.
And a gee whiz, wow, look at that. So yeah, it's a little bit different, but yeah, TV, you have to kind of worry about that appearance.
Well, you look great. You look fit. Yeah. We love you.
Well, thank you, Mike.
You're the most respected weather guy. I'm sorry, meteorologist.
I appreciate it.
In the tri-state. Thank you for being on The Coolest Guy I Know, our latest webisode.
I'm not called cool all that often, so I'm excited to be here. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you. And please subscribe to the 103 GBF YouTube channel. Click that little thing right above my head, and you're in. And thank you, Wayne Hart.